Good morning, everybody, and good morning, Avril. How are you this morning?
I'm well, Bridget, and how are you doing?
I'm good, thanks very much. We have a couple of people in this morning. Good morning, Anne. Good morning, Helen. Good morning, Debs. Good morning, Martha. Good morning, Mary. Vincent, Caroline. And there's so much people. Matthew. There is Michael, Anne. There's so much people. I just leave it at that. So how are you anyway this morning, Avril?
I'm well, thank you. I'm looking forward to chatting with the guys this morning in relation to something that's quite relevant as we experience our days, as we know.
Yeah, definitely. This is going to be a really good topic, especially because conflict is a hard one to deal with, and like a hard one, like even in work and stuff, can be awkward. So it's really good. It's really good to get this chat done today, and especially coming up to the weekend in November as well. Like, I just think it's a really good time for this chat.
Yeah, definitely. You know, November isn't exactly the most spectacular month we can have sometimes in Ireland. So yeah, absolutely. Why not talk about conflict in the middle of that?
Yeah, definitely. So we have a lot of good mornings in the chat. I think I see the comment saying the screen was frozen. I think that's on your side. So if you just check your connection and make sure it's okay. It's just if the connection's okay here, but if it's bad, the screen will freeze. But there will be a replay link, so if there's any problems at all, they'll get the replay link 2 hours after this in an email, so they'll be able to keep on and watch on afterwards. And we were talking before we came on to the live room, we were talking about the Super Value ad, the Christmas ad, if anyone had seen it this morning. It's absolutely brilliant. I think it's one of the best ads I've seen, and it's really heartfelt and really heartwarming to watch. So that's perfect. So perfect. So Avril, would you like to tell us a bit about what we're going to be talking about today? Just a short synopsis.
Yeah, totally. I want to thank you first, Bridget, because you're the behind-the-scenes woman for TrainedIn, and you do a huge amount. And the audience might or might not know that you study at Maynooth University, and you're completing your work placement through TrainedIn, and you do a huge amount behind the scenes. So, and I think TrainedIn have just actually provided so much support at the moment in the context of COVID, So in terms of today, we're going to be talking about conflict, and specifically from an occupational focus. So by occupation, I mean work. So conflict at work. And I'll walk you guys through, I suppose, my own experience of it, the good, the bad, and the ugly in that context, in terms of what I find works and doesn't work. And really, as my business name is Human Reasons, it's really coming from a human perspective in terms of my lived experience, in terms of what has supported me and what hasn't supported me, in terms of myself directly experiencing conflict, but also in terms of my advisory work that I support companies with as a HR consultant, that I would provide advisory support in that context and what I've learned through that journey, and also through the career services that we offer within our team at Human Reasons. Conflict comes up all the time. It comes up in every part of our lives. It's completely inevitable. And I spent a lot of my time trying to avoid conflict, and it just doesn't work, It's exhausting anyway, and it's going to happen anyway. So so we'll talk about that as well. But that's really a flavour of what I'm going to be focusing on, but very much rooted in practical experience.
Perfect. So without further ado, we might kick off. So hello, my name is Bridget Quinn, and I'm part of the team here at TrainedIn. We are absolutely delighted to have been engaged by Taste of Success Skillnet to run a series of 60 bite-sized upskilling workshops between the dates of the 17th of August to the 18th of December across varying different topics. Today, we are delighted to welcome Avril Mansworth from Human Reasons to deliver this workshop on conflict. Before we start, there's just a small bit of housekeeping. So we can't see you and we can hear you, so please make use of the chat facility. Any questions at all, just pop them in the chat. And if you don't feel comfortable asking the question with your name, you can send it directly to me at admin, and I'll answer your question without giving away your name. So I'll ask any questions you want. So please make use of the chat. So also, I'm going to pop in the learner profile into the Skillnet learner profile into the chat. So if you haven't already completed it, could you please complete it after the call? I'll also be popping in some registrations for upcoming workshops. If anyone wants to go attend the upcoming workshops, the registration will be in the chat. So please make use of Avril's time this morning. So I'm going to turn off my mic and my camera, and I'll let Avril get started, but I'll be in the background. So if any questions or anything, please pop them in the chat. Thanks very much. I'll let you go ahead with your presentation.
Thanks, Bridget. That's excellent. So yeah, exactly. So there's loads of practical things in terms of these online training delivery sessions, and eventually I think when the pandemic is finished, I'll be used to them, But if my eyes are flitting from screen to screen, it's because I have another laptop here as a backup, because I was paranoid about my charger not working. So I'm delighted, and I hope I'm looking into the camera at this laptop. I'm delighted. It's so strange not to have an audience in front of you and not to be getting that live feedback. But I'm just delighted to talk to you about conflict, because for most of my life I found conflict so hard. And I think I have lost things. I've learned so much through that process, conflict in its various manifestations across life. And we're going to be talking about it from a work perspective today. But of course, there's that multidimensionality of our human experience. We just don't live in work. So if something's happening at work, it can filter into our personal life. If something happens from a conflict perspective in our personal life, it can feed into our work life. So there's all these different dynamics feeding in constantly, which makes it really interesting. But it's really easy to think, it's lovely to think about the interesting component when everything is kind of settled again. Oh, that was a very interesting experience. But the actual reality of conflict can be so difficult. It can be so hard at every level, at a physiological level, we'll chat about that too. Your body, your hormones, your whole system is in overdrive. There's reasons for it, obviously, but it's not easy either. So, but there are some really practical things that are very supportive from that context. So I am just over 40 and a half years on the planet. My business is Human Reasons. And as I said, we do provide HR services for companies and career services for individuals. So I am working a lot in terms of supporting people in relation to conflict and conflict at work. And conflict at work still exists, as sure as the morning will come, we're going to have conflict. And what I'm noticing, I suppose, and again, I'm just noticing this because I'm in no way an expert and don't proclaim to be at any level. But what I am noticing is that the dynamic around conflict is different now in terms of the current pandemic. So we have lots of conflicts, dynamics around conflict anyway, because it's so relational. So it's by relational, I mean, it's so relationship orientated, or relationship with ourselves. And we would, refer to that as kind of the intrapersonal world, and as my colleague and who I work with over the years, Helen Prendergast, she references intrapersonal. We've spoken about that before. So with conflict within ourselves and, conflict with others in the interpersonal domain. And it's very relationship dominated in that context. So there's loads happening in it anyway. But from a COVID perspective, in terms of the current reality, conflict at work, we are seeing additional dynamics coming into that mix. So I'll talk about those as well, okay? So in terms of my own experience, I suppose I worked in the whole area of HR for, I think it's around it's the bones of 20 years in various contexts, right? So, and some people, I call my business Human Reasons. Some people call HR Human Resistance. But, you end up kind of seeing a lot of things and what's really helpful within that. So what's really helpful for me at a very baseline level, before I go into any detail or any story in relation to whatever has happened. So something's happened. There's some sort of situation in front of you. So what's really helpful for me is, just to stop and firstly think about the who. So there's a who here on the screen and there's a huge deliberate question mark next to it. So the who. So the who in two contexts. So the who in the context of me, so who I am, and the who in the context of the other person. So that's really, really relevant. And we'll talk about why that's relevant. Okay, so just 1 second there now. So firstly, thinking about that who. So, there is the who. And essentially in terms of the workforce, when we apply for work as the who, as the person, we put our best foot forward. We put, it's like getting out the good cutlery because Auntie Mary's coming, in the case of my Auntie Mary, who lives in, my grand auntie lives in Tipperary, and I know Bridget's from Tipperary as well. So you put your best foot forward when you're applying for work. You show the best, we talk about that phraseology in talent recruitment, now called talent acquisition. And we talk about, split the best from the rest. So society and everything and a future employer and the whole world demands us to say, we are brilliant and here are all the reasons. I'm the bright, shiny star, I should say. As Judson Brewer says, I'm the BBO, I'm the bigger, better offer. And the brain is always, from a neuroscience perspective, always looking for this BBO, the bigger, the better, better offer. So when we apply for work, just translating that into a very practical perspective from the who, when we apply for work, we totally show our best self. You know, we don't go in and say, well, these are all the things I made a hames of, as we say in Cork where I live. We don't. We go in and we say, we're brilliant, and here are all the reasons why. You know, and the recruiter comes and looks at our CV, and someone like, so, you know, in Human Reasons, we support people in, you know, having a brilliant CV. And these are all my great things about me, and you go through the recruitment process and all the rest of it, the best, you know, whatever tools we're using to get through that process, and start candidate. I'm brilliant. Here we go. I've gotten through the process. You know, here's my job. Here's my employment contract. I'm starting next week. And that's grand. Okay. And like, there is an artificiality to recruitment processes. We all know this, right? And it's just, we're demanded to just speak about our best qualities, our best skills, our best attitudinal components, our best qualities, our best educational elements, you know, and that's great. But guess what? We're human, and something's going to go wrong at some point. So it's like, oh, I forgot to mention all the other stuff. So thinking about the who. So in the workplace, you know, so again, from a contextual perspective, sorry, I just need to go back there. From a contextual perspective, in the workplace, so we've come in, we're brilliant, we've got our new clothes on, you know, first day in the office, it's all wonderful. And then, you know, usually then we get a phone call on Human Reasons a few weeks later, oh, guess what's happened with John or Tom or whoever it is, right? So why is the who relevant? So considering the fact that when we're at work, we're demanded to talk about what we're so great at, but considering the fact also that we are human and we all have a story, and who is our, you know, what is our story? So as a who, so as the person, and I hope I'm making sense here. What has my story been before starting with the company? And we've all had a background before starting our position. We've all had a story so far in life. You know, we've all had different backgrounds. And so from a who perspective, our background before today, and today is the 12th of November, as far as I know, 2020. But before today, we've all had completely different backgrounds in life. There might be some similarities, but we've all had a different story. And our story as the who, both for us and for the other person, is very determinant in terms of how we handle conflict. And it's a huge shaping factor. And like, think about Play-Doh, you know, that the children play with. It's a huge molding factor in terms of how we see conflict, you know, in terms of our perception, because the whole show is about perception, how we see it, how we experience it, and how we deal with it, both in terms of our relationship with ourselves, intrapersonal, and our relationship with others, interpersonal. Our story before today is extremely important. So when I have conflict in the morning, either, you know, if I'm advising a company in conflict, or if something's happened within my own team or something, you know, with a client, and I have two colleagues who work with me, something comes up for us, I always think about the who. So who is the person? So what is my conflict style? What is their conflict style? And there's tools out there. So if you Google things like the what we call the TKI, the Thomas Kilmann instrument, that's an actual psychometric instrument that will walk you through a number of questions around how you typically prefer to deal with conflict. And coming out of that TKI survey, you'll see your conflict handling style. So are you conflict avoidant? Are you conflict accommodating? Are you conflict passive? Are you conflict assertive? Are you conflict aggressive? So what is your style? So always thinking about the who. So what has the person's story been so far in life? You know, how have they experienced conflict? And we're all so different. So in, like, let's say even in my little family, in my home here, and I live on Great Island in a town called Cove in East Cork, and it's beautiful. In our little family here, there's 4 people in my house, and the 4 of us handle conflict completely differently. You know, we're all so different. So if you've had, let's say from a conflict perspective, if you've had a situation where majority of time in your life you've been afraid of conflict and you don't like it, and you're conflict avoidant and you fear it even before you see it, that's going to impact how you are at work and how you deal with conflict at work. If you're relatively comfortable with conflict and it's like, okay, it kind of generally goes okay, you know, I'm kind of in the middle, I kind of know that I'll be all right no matter what, that's great, that's ideal. And other people then, they're conflict seekers, they love conflict. There's something within their psychographic profile, there's the psychology profile that it does something for them. It meets one of their needs, that they're seeking conflict, and it's something maybe to do with their, like I was listening to something last night in relation to it's like craniosacral, like bioenergy work. There's something in their energy system that it's a kind of like an energy release for them. So they're seeking it so they can release. because they haven't found another way of doing it. So again, always thinking about that who. So who's in front of you? So does the person avoid conflict? So there's usually kind of 3 categories. So are they kind of an avoider? They hate it. They don't want it. Are they in the middle? They kind of just, they're not mad about it, but they kind of generally know they'll be okay. Or are they a conflict seeker? So thinking about the other. So we always think about the other, but then turn that mirror around to you. How do you, as your who, how do you feel about conflict? So what's your style? And that can change, because it can change. It's not like the temporal quality of conflict, like in terms of you, it can change across your lifespan, and it can change across contexts. So where we feel the stakes are higher, we're going to behave differently probably. So I know for a fact that there's certain things I'll get away with in my little home from a conflict perspective, but my goodness, I would not get away with it when I'm advising a client company, for example. We kind of know what we can do in the different contexts. So always thinking about that as well. But the person's background before today is something that I've spent a lot of time here talking about, but it's really, really, really important. And you might know. So we do things, so a lot, you might have a sense of what it might be, and you could be wrong. Some people are very open. With people I trust, I can be very, very open with them, but I'm not open across the board. But I've kind of got like a small crew, and in my crew, I tell them everything. So people who will open up to you and tell you, great. But a lot of people might mask it, and what are called adaptations. So, they kind of hide it. We're very good in terms of our evolutionary biology, kind of hiding the bad stuff. As I said, back to the CV on the screen here, we're going to show our best of our best. So you might necessarily know. But the more you're working with somebody, the more you're being that sort of scientist, and you're data gathering, you're kind of noticing what they're doing, how they're behaving, what's their style around conflict, what you think it might be. I mean, and ideally from a work perspective, you'd be talking about this. You'd be talking about this in a really honest way, in a way that you feel you can from a work perspective. Obviously, you're not going to mention everything. Some people do, and that can be a boundaries issue as well, where you're like, no, I don't need to know that stuff, reverse. So I'm not saying that either, but kind of having a healthy dialogue. And of course, this is different again in terms of that interview phase, because in the interview phase, you're going to be asked something like we call them CBIs, competency-based interviews. Tell me about a time you handled conflict and what was the outcome. And of course, somebody like us, we're going to train and help people to just prep their answer. Like, this is when I handled it, and this is the situation, and I handled it, and this is the great outcome, But in the live reality of the workplace, it's very much trying to have a healthy dialogue around that. And it's not an easy one, but it's so worth it. And it's so worth it thinking about the who. Because at the very, very early stages of life, and it's all about relationships, the whole show is about relationships. At the very, very early stages of life, from a conflict perspective, we form what we call attachments. So we form relationships with other people. So we have a relationship with ourselves, and obviously then it's going to be our primary, what we call caregiver. So your mother, for those of us that were lucky enough to be, in the early stages around our mothers, or somebody else looking after us, those early attachments and those early, what we call relational bonds, are so, so important in terms of you being able to trust a relationship. So, and then that'll impact your ability to trust other people, and critically your ability to trust yourself. And then that comes into how you deal with conflict. So you might have been born in 1971, but you could be here in the office, and you could be in one of the commercial parks, 12th of November, 2020, or you're working from home like me at the moment. But that 1971 imprint, as we call them, is here with you today in terms of your first experiences of relationships, your first experiences of the world, your first experiences of attachment, and being able to trust other people. And I spoke about this in a more recent webinar that I delivered with my colleague, who isn't with me today, unfortunately, Sarah O'Hay. And we also delivered it for Skillnet. And we were talking about, how our story before today impacts now. And it's so relevant from a conflict perspective. But we were talking about it in terms of more from a coping and a well-being point of view. But, and I was talking about attachment. It's like, well, Jesus, what's attachment? And I used to be sick of people talking to me about attachment. Like, a previous person I was in a lot of contact with said to me, what's your attachment style? And I said, I'm sick of it. I'm sick of thinking about attachment. I studied it years ago, move on. But actually, we never move on from attachment. Attachment, how we attach to other people, how we can trust relationships, how we can trust others. And in a previous life, I did a lot of work with Gallup. the Gallup organization, who you would have heard a lot about in the more recent weeks with the presidential election in the US, because they, you know, are the custodians of the Gallup poll. So Democrats high, Republicans low, you know, whatever that is. I don't know what the update as of today is, because I've just taken my finger off that pulse completely. And it's actually been good for me from a well-being perspective. But in terms of Gallup, you know, learning to work with people in terms of their personality profile, and in terms of dealing with things, and in terms of conflict, and hiring people through Gallup tools, but also working with people from a development perspective in terms of maximizing the potential based on the Gallup methodologies and attachment features. And I used to say, why are they asking this question? And it's a question in relation to relational trust. And it's, do you trust people? And I'd be killed for saying this, but this is the question. Do you trust people until they prove you can't? Or do people have to earn your trust first? So I'll just repeat that. So do you trust people until they prove you can't? Or do people have to earn your trust first? And that's so deterministic in terms of how we view the world. And I have to say, you know, when I first completed one of those tools when I was 25, over 15 years ago now, I said, they have to earn my trust. Of course they do. You have to earn it. Totally conditional. Because that's the way I sort of moved and shaped to my formative years, from a conditional perspective in terms of our realities as a family, and in terms of our circumstances in life, you know, in our early stages. But that's changed for me now. It's changed for me now massively, you know. So these things can change as well, absolutely. And the longitudinal elements are very interesting. So the who is very, 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 very important from a conflict perspective. So just moving on in terms of our slides. So why bother? So why bother taking time to think about conflict and the who and all this stuff, and this girl, you know, with this Cove accent from Cork? What is she talking about? Well, conflict's inevitable, you know, and as a really, you know, lovely psychologist that I had the pleasure of working with before, Carmen Coughlin Murphy, said to me, you know, death and taxes, and I'd add, yeah, death, taxes and conflict, you know, totally inevitable. So spending some time thinking about it can be massively, from the pragmatic element, can be really practical, right? And, you know, obviously this dude here in the middle doing his Zen pose, whichever one it is, that's what we're kind of aiming for. Do we all get it? No. But the left or the right probably, well, the left definitely isn't the better option, but it is really worth it, you know, spending that time thinking about that. Dance, because like it's going to happen. So there's another psychologist that I'd like to mention, right? And he's a great guy. And if you get a chance, look him up. And you might know about him already, Daniel Siegel. So Siegel. So Dan Siegel, Dan the Man, as myself and my friend Valerie call him, because he is Dan the Man. He's done so much work in terms of relationships and the brain and how things can go wrong in the brain. So really basic sort of neuroscientific learning in terms of how the brain works normally and how it works when we go off the rails and things like that. So what he says from a relationship perspective is that there's the 3 R's. We're either in one of these 3 R's. So relationship-wise, and relationship begins with R, so it's great. He's got loads of what's it called, alliteration going on. So 3 R's. So we're either relating to somebody, so relating, rupturing, not great, but it happens, or repair. So we're either relate, rupture, or repair. I have to say that when I first read that, and I think it was in his book Mindsight that Valerie lent to me so kindly, one of the many books. I think I actually read that one. I didn't read most of the other ones she gave me. I think I read the front and back, and maybe some of the parts that were interesting. But I definitely resonated with that. So, or for resonate, I thought, yeah, you know, in relationships, either relate, rupture, or repair. So that's what he says. So he's like, you know, we're either in one of those 3 things. So it's going to happen. So conflict is going to happen. So relate is obviously ideal. You're relating to somebody. Rupture will happen. And repair is really, really critical. So from a repair perspective, you know, when conflict happens, so usually what happens, like neuroscientifically, is that like both people, or at least one person, isn't operating kind of, you know, like their, what we call like their executive functioning, their ability to plan and organize in their brain isn't working properly. There's the right side of the brain, the left side, they're just not talking to each other. There's the old part of the brain that will react really, really quickly. Like there was great work done years ago. Goldie Hawn, if you remember her, she has a mindfulness-based charity in the UK called Mind Up. And they did a lot of work on explaining the mechanics of the brain to children. So for kids to understand when their brain goes offline, what's going on. And as you guys know more than I do, from an evolutionary psychology point of view, we've got all these kind of old parts of the brain that we've hung on to because we still need them, but they react really, really quickly. Why did they do that? As we well know, and we're probably sick of hearing, like they had to. So back in the day, back in the cave, they had to react really quickly because it was either live or die. But we still have those old parts in our brain. And kind of pointing to the bottom of where I think the brainstem might be. And if my brother was alive today, he'd probably tell me I'm pointing to the wrong part. But it's the old part of the brain. It's what's called the limbic part. It reacts really, really quickly and unconsciously and like so fast. Like I'm talking nanoseconds. It's not seconds, it's nanoseconds. Really lightning quick. So when something happens from a conflict point of view, understanding that you're going to have this old part of your brain react really, really fast. And depending on your life story so far, you're going to either, avoid, be kind of okay, or look for that conflict. And the old part of the brain is what they said to children is called the barking dog. It's the amygdala. It's tiny. I think it's the size of an almond. It's meant to be really, really small, but it reacts really, really quickly. And what's our best friend in that context is what's called the prefrontal cortex. And I believe it's at the top of the eye socket. It's the newer part of the brain, so it's the cortex. It's the newer part that we developed as mammals, and it's the part that calms us down. So it calms down what's called our ANS, our autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system is the one that's responding really, really quickly. And a lot of it's automatic, like hence autonomic. So that prefrontal cortex is going to calm your brain down, and there's loads of things you can do. And I talk about that briefly before we move on to the Q&A. So it's like, what now? That's the what now part. Sorry, 1 second, I'm on the slide. So what now? So the what now is understanding mechanistically, right? I have a brain, just like the person next to me. I've got a really old part that's going to react really, really quickly. What can I do now? So what now? So the what now from a conflict perspective is understanding this firstly. Well, taking time before conflict obviously is ideal. But kind of going, yeah, that's the old part. Okay, whatever part it is. And what now? What helps you right now? So anything that is mindfulness based will help you without a shadow of a doubt. And I spent a long time in my life, not distributing that, but kind of going, yeah, whatever. The breath, are you joking me? Like I've got this huge problem with, Roger, and the breath is not going to help me fix that, but actually it does. Okay, it does work. So like really, really simply, mindfulness. So what is it? So there's, as I said a few weeks ago on a previous webinar, there's so many commercial manifestations of it. It's simple. It's just being in the present. It's really simple, but it's really, really difficult. We don't do it because we're trained automatically, because we've had like a life experience so far formatively. We've formatively learned. We've learned by imitation. We've learned by tacit learning, which is soaking up our environments. Our brains are prediction machines. There's an author, Maya Salovich, I'm not pronouncing her surname properly, but she talks about that. She says, she's a book called The Unbroken Brain. And she says the brain is a prediction machine. It's like a computer we have in our head where we have these templates for life experiences and we're just expecting them to happen again and again and again. And I notice this constantly in terms of myself. And what happens then is, we've got the brain kind of going, this is my prediction of what's going to go on. And the brain's trying to help us, but it doesn't always get it right. And that's the difference. And mindfulness is the complete opposite. It's like, well, try to, in some way, park the conceptual stuff and just be in the direct experience. It sounds so simple. It is so difficult. I've been trying to learn this, and I'm an active practitioner of mindfulness, but I've been trying to learn this since the summer of 2009, and I'm still finding it difficult. But I do know that it really, really helps. And it's so simple. It's so simple. So we have all these kind of expectations going on in terms of, okay, so the brain's going to react really quickly. You can do whatever it's going to do in terms of the old part. Then all these kind of templates are going to come in and go, yeah, that's the way she always is. And sure, here she is again. And sure, that's your man. He thinks the world owes him a favor. And we've got all these kind of stories going on. And it's like the narrator function in the brain that's always telling a story. And then they might say something then, and then what plugs in then is what's called confirmation bias. And you're like, yeah, she said that. I knew it. I knew she was thinking that. I just knew it. I was listening to somebody talk, and I think technology, I think I should be kept away from technology completely. I'd love to live without technology, but that's for my own reasons. But I was listening to somebody recently, and we all do this, right? And she was talking about a situation in terms of conflict at work. And I was just, trying to actively listen. Now, of course, my mind was wandering at times, but I was noticing it was, because we're all human reasons. But she was talking about this kind of like a group WhatsApp chat in her workplace. And she said, and that person said that. And I just knew she meant, I just knew it. I knew by her. And it's like, she doesn't know. But none of us know. Like, we're lucky to know in relation to ourselves. We certainly don't know in relation to other people. We think we know, and it's the biggest illusion ever. And in my psychology studies, we talk about illusory correlation. It's the biggest illusion ever. We don't actually know. Guess what? We don't know. And guess what? It's great that we don't know. And very often I write in my hand DKM, and it stands for don't know mind. And don't know mind comes from Buddhist thinking, where you just don't know. We think we know. And it's really, really helpful, especially when you're going into a situation where you're kind of going, I think this is going to be like this or whatever. And you just try to be with the experience. And as I keep saying, it is, difficult to do. But what can you do to support yourself in doing that? And what kind of really practical steps you can take? I mean, you can go and learn. You can do what I did, like complete, like, let's say, what's called MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction. That's an excellent program. You can do it in Ireland to Catherine Sutton, who's brilliant. I think her website is everydaymindfulness.ie. That's John Kabat-Zinn's program. He is the person, and I mentioned this previously, he is the person that we all have a huge amount to be grateful for in relation to him, because mindfulness comes from Buddhism, but it's not Buddhist. But that ancient Eastern philosophy and thinking, he actually brought that into mainstream medicine through patient support programs that he was doing to a hospital, I think to the University of Massachusetts, to UMass, but also a hospital in that area, patients with chronic, psychosocial conditions, psychological conditions, all sorts of disorders from a mental health perspective. Nothing was working. He trialed his own MBSR, and he started seeing results. And I'm very, very lucky to have access to Judson Brewer, Judson, and surname Brewer, Brewer, Judd Brewer, he's called Dr. Judd. And he's one of the world's leaders now in addiction studies. And he's finding an addiction treatment, and he's actually finding mindfulness to be one of the most helpful things ever. And again, in terms of supporting patients, and again, it's not about fixing something, it's about being with the experience. So from a conflict perspective, how's that relevant? So knitting that in now into conflict will be, right, in that conflict situation, you'll be learning basic mindfulness tools to be aware of how you actually are right now. Not how you think you are, not how your brain is trying to invent the Alan Turing computer machine to predict how you are, and I love that movie, The Imitation Game. Not predicting how you are, not thinking about how you are, but how are you? And your body is really, really helpful with this as well. And again, I spent many years saying, don't talk to me about somatic stuff. Soma is body. Anything that's somatic psychology orientated is to do with the body. But the body is brilliant because the body is here. It's here right now as I press the wall. It's right now as I touch the screen. Here's the body. And the tactile system, the touch system, is one of the fastest ways to calm down your nervous system. It's one of the fastest ways in. And I learned that to support work. I was supporting one of my family's members with, in terms of working with fantastic people, occupational therapists. And I was like, I didn't know about that. But any of that stuff that helps you to be in your body, even just feeling your feet in the ground, all of this kind of stuff, trying to be in the present as much as possible right now. And my webinar a few weeks ago was called Right Here, Right Now. But right now, not what you think he's thinking. We're great mind readers. I know I'm a brilliant mind reader and I want to be. Not what we think we're thinking or we think that person's thinking. Not what we think might be happening. Not what we think the text message meant or whatever. What's actually happening. What is the direct experience? The direct experience is the answer most of the time. It's so supportive. And I know this through my own experience as I reflect, as I try to become more of a reflective practitioner. And I did a fantastic training program last year to an organisation that are based in Cork and Kerry called SHEP, Social Health Education Project. And it was in reflective practice. So it's all about, we have an experience and then reflecting on it. What do we learn from that? Because I find it so hard to slow down. But when we do slow down then and we pay proper attention and really reflecting on, well, what really helped me there and what didn't help me? And very, very simply, what helps and what doesn't help. And the more simplistic we are in these scenarios, the better. So just summarizing what I've covered from that perspective is that essentially, in terms of any conflict situation, it is really, really helpful to look intrapersonally first at our own who. What has our story been in life so far? And critically then the link, well, what's that conceptual bridge to how I deal with conflict now? And how do I deal with conflict at work? And is that different at home? Well, we're focusing on work today. So really being clear in that who, and then the why, in terms of it is very, very helpful to do that. And the what now, in terms of that mindfulness piece, being really, really supportive in terms of that direct experience right now. And some other really practical things, like, that we know that, like, so much of it is community, like most of the show is obviously it's relationship, and then put up there, relationships coexist with communication. And again, how we communicate with ourselves, but with others. And let's remind ourselves of the communication pie chart, that I forget about constantly myself. But this pie chart tells us that most of the communication we do is non-verbal. So you're actually paying more attention to my gestures, let's say, the tone of my voice, my accent, my pitch, my pace, as opposed to the content of what I'm actually saying. And Professor Maribane in the University of California, we've so much to be grateful for to him as well, because this reminds us of that, non-verbals. I just knew by the way she looked at me. I just knew by the look on his face when I went into the room. I just knew. Like, it's this kind of, and Stephen Porges talks about neuroception, how we're perceiving that. So the non-verbals are critically important, and we can get those wrong too. But using those in and wrapping them up as kind of your best friend and saying, well, how can I use a non-verbal? So in a conflict situation, so practically from a work perspective again, and making that link from a work perspective, the power of non-verbal in conflict is just enormous. So can you relax your body when you're with the person? Can you relax your face? Can you relax your shoulders? Can you relax your hands? Can you relax your gestures? Can you relax your gaze? Like that, will we co-regulate each other? That'll help the other person to calm down as well. You'll feel a bit better about you too, which is really important. And that reciprocity is really, really, really helpful, And as we know, it's that affective component. Then you'll help the person in terms of how they feel and how you feel. And they do say that it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And they also say people never forget how you made them feel. And there's this thing called the felt sense. It goes into, it just, soaks right into us. How did you feel around that person? How did you feel when you were around them? And that feeling, that affective component, the feeling of it, the emotional quality, we know is a way stronger than any thought that we'd ever have. Feelings are really rooted in that limbic, the old system as well. And it's very hard to actually change them. So they're very, very, very prominent. And just finally then, conflict really, really coexists again with lots of other things, as I said already, relationships and communication. But it obviously really coexists from a practical perspective in terms of work and our occupational focus with decision making. So always being really careful, in making decisions. And particularly around conflict, and this YGT, as I've got on the screen here, you've got this, you know yourself, you are your own best teacher and your own best advisor. And if you take some time to think in terms of the content that I've walked us through today about you, about your story, about what you've learned so far, how do you normally show up in conflict? What works for you? What doesn't work for you? What are you going to do next time? And really being mindful then of the fact that you're going to be making decisions as well. And then, there is a whole concept of interpersonal mindfulness. And then based on the decisions you make, you might actually have more conflict. So, conflict just doesn't stop in one line, unfortunately. So we can kind of help a situation or we can hinder it. And we all know this. And there is that whole, as I said already, the relate, the rupture and the repair. So just be really, really careful, from that perspective in terms of decision making, because, you see all sorts of dynamics in terms of, resolving conflict. And some people, I know I can be too compensatory. So I'm trying to make up for something for about 2 years after it's happened. It's like, well, that happened ages ago. I've forgotten about it. From a personal perspective, that would be, a huge part of my conflict handling style. I wouldn't even think about it from a work point of view, but certainly from a work perspective. So in your repair, in your rupturing, in your relating, being really, really cognizant of decision making. And I think that wraps up what I have said, kind of puts it into place in terms of today, because if I add more into that now, it'll become diluted. And I don't want it to become dilutional. I want to keep the kind of message on track in terms of what I'm saying, and that it is relevant to my experience. And even if it doesn't kind of sink in for you now, listen to the recording later on and leave it kind of sit and maybe reflect on it and maybe listen to it in a week and kind of go, yeah, I think I get it now, or I think it makes sense. And if it doesn't, you kind of go, right, okay, I definitely don't know what she was talking about, get in touch with me, because I'd love to talk to you more about it. And I'd love that opportunity. And I'm very, very interested in all things from a work perspective and the benefit of work and actually what we can learn in terms of dealing with conflict. There's so much to learn. And I'm training as a psychologist, and my area of research interest is the therapeutic benefit of work. So how work can actually help us in terms of our lives, as my headphones fall out. So what is the helpful component of work in terms of dealing with anxiety? Because most of the literature talks about the negative aspects of work in terms of anxiety, but I'm very interested in the positive components. And I'm really interested in what we can learn from conflict and dealing with it, and the nuts and bolts, and when it doesn't go well, and how you brought it back online, and how you brought yourself back online, and critically then, as you become more of a reflective practitioner, what have you learned for next time? Because there's going to be a next time. So that's the end of my content, but I'm really happy to take any questions either through the chat or to whatever format Bridget feels is best.
Hi, Avril. That was really good. That was brilliant. That was really informative, and brilliant, really good tips involved in it as well, such as the mindfulness and feeling grounded. I thought that was really good. So we had some questions during it. So we had Sheena says, which is better, trusting people until they prove you can't, or not trusting until people earn your trust?
So neither is better. It's a great question. It's a self-rating question. So it's whatever is your answer. So neither is better. But the key thing from that is that it's an information point. So it tells you, in terms of the person, do they trust first or not? So is their trust conditional or not, essentially? So there's no right or wrong answer. And there's all sorts of benefits to not trusting somebody until they prove you can. So it depends on the job. It depends on the context. You can't be too trusting either. There's a bit of a risk in that too.
Yeah, definitely. So we had a question. Please, can we also have a link to the attachment styles and a link to the TKI survey?
Yeah, well, attachment, yeah, totally. I'm like, attachment, but no, it is really important. But I keep forgetting. And TKI, the Thomas Kilmann instrument, is a commercial instrument, so it's copyrighted. But I can definitely send the link onto the kind of information website that will describe it.
Perfect. So Regina said, reptilian, old part of the brain, executive center, the top part of the brain. So I think that was a comment when you were talking about the brain, correct? Yeah,
so the old part of the limbic, and it's like, it reacts so fast. And that's great, And actually there's another book. There's a guy, Robert Sapolsky, he wrote Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. Because in the zebra world, you either get eaten or you don't. So the threat is either there or it's not. But in our case, it's just this dripping thing, constant. And that's our brain is overreacting, constantly thinking that, I know myself, I've gotten an email and felt like someone's jumped through the window here and tried to box me. And it's like, it's an email, Avril. You're okay.
Oh, yeah, definitely. That's really actually nice. That's a cool title as well for a book. It's quite unique.
Why zebras don't get ulcers. And that's linked into what I mentioned a while ago, neuroception. It's all, like your brain trying to perceive threat.
Yeah, definitely. That's really good. Actually, really good book. And Stephen said, this is great. This has improved my insights, or myself, and understanding myself. Thanks, Mill.
Oh, he's really welcome, Stephen. No problem. My pleasure.
That's great. So Mary said, how easy is it to get from a ruptured relationship to repair?
Yeah, that's a great question, Mary. Would you, I suppose, Mary, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, but I guess it depends on the relationship. It depends on the base, like in my view. So it's only my view. So my view is that it depends on the base that's there. So what is the relationship heritage? So what is that base? What is that literal foundation of a house that's there already? And then that'll tell you how you can get to the repair or not. Some of them are easy to repair. Some of them aren't, It depends on the story so far. It's what's happened before now,
Yeah, definitely. So Avril, do you have any last tips you really want us to take away from today? And if anyone has any further questions, please pop them in the chat now. But do you have any tips you really want us to take away from today?
Conflict. No, I don't think so. I think I was very information heavy in terms of what I went through. So I would recommend that people sort of listen back to it. And, the people I mentioned, like Dan Siegel, the 3 R's, he does a lot of work on the whole brain child for kids. I mentioned Judson Brewer, in terms of world leader addiction support. Wow, what a dude. And he's really real, I'd like to thank Great Island Media, actually, who do a lot of work on my behalf in terms of promoting my business. I just wanted to mention that. Judson Brewer. And then from an Irish perspective, I mentioned Catherine Sutton's name in terms of being an Irish mindfulness teacher who teaches MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction. And it is L'Oreal. It is worth it. It is worth it. It is not easy. but it is worth it, you know. And I definitely would not have been like, I literally, when I first came across mindfulness, I was like, I'm going to box the person who's told me. How can it be? Like, I literally had such a visceral reaction to the simplicity of it. But the more I practice it, the more I go, you know, life is hard, but can you imagine how hard it would be if you didn't have this? Oh God. So
yeah, definitely. And I think it's like something that people really need to look into as well, especially now. A lot of people are stressed with the times we're living in now, and that might result in conflict if people are stressed. So mindfulness really is the way to go right now. I think, like, to relax and just.
And there is that whole, like, we call it compare and despair. So it's like, well, this time last year it wasn't as bad because It's like, well, actually, what are you doing now? You're coming out of the present. You're just comparing. And most importantly, is that helping you? No, it's not. Right, let's do something else, you know, because it doesn't help. Not at all.
Regina said, great information. Thank you, Avril. I'll be doing some reading.
You're welcome, Regina. It's a while since I've heard the name Regina. It's a beautiful name.
Yes, lovely. Is there any books you really would recommend, the first book to read? To get you into it?
Yeah, and like, I'm like everybody, I struggle to sit down and create the time to actually read a book, and I don't know how I'm doing my research at the moment because I'm meant to be doing loads of reading. But so I actually have one of them there, but if I move that, everything will fall down. I meant to mention that picture, and I didn't mention it at all. It's Dali's Girl at the Window. It's a beautiful picture, but for another time. But books wise, MBSR, Mark Williams from the University of Oxford, any of his books, just Google Mark Williams and they'll come up. So mindfulness-based stress reduction will come up, and mindfulness-based cognitive behavioural therapy, and Mark Williams and his contemporaries in Oxford, like John Teasdale and some of the Zindel Seagal, I think, might be related to Dan, I'm not sure, Dan the man. But any of Mark Williams. And if you put Mark Williams into YouTube as well, his short mindfulness clips will come up too.
Yeah, definitely. That's actually really good tips. If anyone is looking for that, they know where to find it now, where to start off. So Sheena said, I loved Avril's non-verbal communication. It sucked me it also.
Well, Sheena, I hope so, and like in a very genuine way, because I hope that it'll help you remember the content. And what I wanted to say to everybody that came to the webinar, because we do provide career services in my business, don't forget to put the webinar on your CV and your LinkedIn profile, and just to make sure that you get the benefit, like cash in that investment of your time and add it to your profile, you know. So and you know, and feel what that's like. It's like, yeah, I did that for me, and yeah, the things are hard at the moment, but there's this, you know, and this is good, and the super value add is good, as Bridget said. It's
lovely if everyone wants to take a look at it. It's actually brilliant.
Super value would be delighted with you.
I know. I'm promoting them to everybody. I just think it's a gorgeous ad. I think it's really nice this time of year as well. I think I love the Christmas ads anyway, but this one is especially, it's so beautiful, especially at this time of year. If everyone wants to watch it, and anyone coming on next Tuesday can let me know what they think of the workshop. So
who do you have on? Sorry, Bridget, who do you have on next Tuesday? I must check.
Just check. Sorry, I actually popped it into the chat. So we have mindset strategies, and then we have tax saving tips for business owners in 2020. Wow. And then we have negotiate your way to success.
Excellent. That sounds good. I must go to some of them.
Yeah, they're all linked in the chat. So thanks very much, Avril. Thanks so much. It was a really good session. And I think a lot of us are going to take away tips from today, and we might all be starting mindfulness this evening after work. But thanks so much for coming on, and thanks everyone else for attending.
You're welcome, Bridget. And hopefully when things have calmed in some way, you know, even though I am going to the future, we might see each other in Tipperary, because you are a Tipperary woman.
Yes,
and I'm a family in Tipperary. Yeah.
Perfect. That's brilliant. So I'll meet in Tipperary when I come back.
Awesome. Exactly.
Perfect.
Take care, Bridget.
Thanks very much. Everyone have a lovely weekend as well, and hopefully I'll see some of you next week. So thanks very much, everybody. Thank you.
Take care, Bridget. Mind yourself. Bye. Bye.
You too. Bye.